Spotify follows YouTube announcing automated audio dubbing in other languages, this time for podcasts. It's a reminder of how amazing AI can be for consumers and how brutal it can be for startups. Welcome back to the AI Breakdown. Well, AI product fall continues, and this time it is Spotify with the announcement of a new feature through which podcasts can offer listeners anywhere in the world the ability to listen in their own language. The feature is called voice translation and isn't just overdubbing, but is overdubbing in the podcaster's own voice. Now, so far, the program has just worked with a small group of podcasters, including Dax Shepard and Monica Padman from Armchair Expert, Lex Friedman, The Ringer's Bill Simmons, and Stephen Bartlett, who does The Diary of a CEO. So far, they've only released translations into Spanish, but are planning to launch French and German translations in the coming weeks. Now, Spotify developed this tool, but they did it based on OpenAI's technology, said Zayed Sultan, Spotify's VP of Personalization. By matching the creator's own voice, voice translation gives listeners around the world the power to discover and be inspired by new podcasters in a more authentic way than ever before. Yesterday, Lex Friedman tweeted, "This is me speaking Spanish thanks to amazing work by Spotify AI engineers. The translation and voice cloning are fully done by AI. Language can create barriers of understanding and thus fuel division. I can't wait for AI to break down this barrier and reveal our common humanity."
How do you think? O sea, a modo de consejo, ya que lo estamos platicando, a diario, ¿qué opinas sobre los problemas difíciles del mundo?
Now, this news may strike you as somewhat familiar to something we talked about last week. Last week, YouTube held their own event called Made on YouTube that was once again full of AI announcements. At Made on YouTube, the company announced DreamScreen, which is a new AI-generated image or video background creator for short videos. They announced AI Insights, which gives creators suggestions for what they should do videos on based on who's been watching their videos and what other types of videos they're watching around the site. They also even announced an AI assistive search for creator music, basically giving people the ability to use a few words to describe the video and have AI recommend a rights-approved soundtrack that would work. But buried in all of these announcements was automatic dubbing with Aloud. YouTube writes, "One way creators look to expand their audiences is through dubbing their content into languages beyond their own. But not all creators have the resources to dub their content professionally, so we're bringing Aloud into YouTube, an AI-powered dubbing tool that will help creators open up their content to the world." Now, Aloud was first announced by Google back in March of 2022. On their blog, they wrote a post called "Overcoming the Language Barrier in Videos with Aloud." Aloud makes video dubbing easy and cost-effective, getting us one step closer towards overcoming the language barrier in videos. Aloud was a product that came out of Google's in-house incubator, which they call Area 120. The announcement post pointed out a few realities of modern video consumption. First, that even though 80% of the world doesn't speak English, a significant majority of videos created were in English. Second, that although subtitles can be useful, they're not necessarily ideal, especially for mobile on-the-go types of usage. Now, back in June, we heard that YouTube was testing this AI-powered dub tool to translate creator videos, and at that time we heard that the company had been testing out Aloud's AI dubbing with, quote, hundreds of creators. At that time, at least, Aloud could only dub into Spanish and Portuguese. However, it's not clear if that's been updated with this latest Made on YouTube announcement. Now, even before this in February, YouTube had created an option to upload multiple audio tracks for an individual video that could be sorted by language. So for creators that had taken the time to actually create a second dubbed version of their video, they at least had the ability to supply that audio and have YouTube serve up the right language for the audience that was watching the video at the time. Of course, an automated AI-driven service is much more likely to mainstream this feature, given how much time and effort and cost there would be associated with this type of dubbing in the past. So I think one dimension of this story is the extent to which AI is rapidly ripping down linguistic barriers. This is, of course, what Lex called out in his tweet about it. And I do think it's fascinating to think about how different the world might be if everyone can consume all of the content without having to worry about what original language it was created in. We're obviously still a fairly far way away from that, given that the parameters of these tests are still fairly limited, but the trajectory here is quite clear. Now, another interesting dimension of this, however, is a little bit more on the inside baseball side about how the AI industry is developing. AI entrepreneur David Park quote tweeted Lex Friedman and said, "This is heartbreaking for the founders who have been tagging Lex every day with pretty much the exact same demo. Now that Spotify and YouTube are adding AI voice cloning and translation to their platforms, I'm curious to see how these founders pivot. This space is moving so fast." Now, by way of example, Wondercraft just announced dubbing as well. Wondercraft is a YC-backed company that is focused on creating AI tools for content creators, particularly podcasters, and for them, dubbing into multiple languages was an obvious next step. Now, right now, Wondercraft seems to be a little bit ahead of Spotify and YouTube, at least based on what's available at the moment. As they wrote earlier today, Spotify announced yesterday their AI-translated podcast using Lex Friedman speaking Spanish as a demo. Lex in Spanish is great, but what's better? Lex in 13 languages. The company says Wondercraft's dubbing engine is perfect for podcasts, YouTube videos, e-learning videos, lectures, interviews, meditation tracks, and documentaries. And the languages available include Spanish, German, French, Arabic, and about 8 others as well. And yet, of course, the question, going back to David Park's post, is what can a company like Wondercraft do to stay ahead of the curve? Or put differently, how much does the advantage of content creators already being locked into the Spotify platform or the YouTube platform mean that they're going to inevitably choose those automated, integrated tools over even a theoretically more powerful tool from a third-party service? Now, this is a new dimension of challenge to the startup ecosystem that has been coming up a lot more now. We've talked a lot about the ways in which the startup ecosystem around artificial intelligence has evolved in unexpected ways that perhaps challenge some assumptions that people had 6 or 12 months ago. We've talked a number of times about Sam Hogan's Twitter essay in which he argued that the companies who had put a UX or UI wrapper around OpenAI technology in an attempt to appeal to the enterprise were some of the biggest initial losers in the space, because ultimately they just didn't have a real source of differentiation. They didn't really have a strong moat. And as companies like OpenAI have launched their own enterprise tools, those startups have found themselves without a really good argument for why them and not just ChatGPT Enterprise. As NVIDIA's Dr. Jim Fan wrote, ChatGPT Enterprise, the beginning of the end of many B2B thin wrapper startups. Now, the other piece of that story is that in addition to startups often finding that they don't really have strong moats when it comes to the enterprise, another issue has been concern among enterprises about sharing proprietary data that could be used to customize and improve AI models with untested, unproven companies. This creates another reason why incumbents, be they big tech platforms or existing consultant relationships, perhaps have a leg up more than they might in another technology area that doesn't benefit so much from deep customization based on proprietary information. Now, the other dimension of this competition is how much integration into platforms that people are already using will box out options from the outside. That's what we were just asking in the context of Spotify versus something like Wondercraft. But another area in which that came up recently was, of course, the announcement of DALL-E 3. Dr. Jim Fan again wrote a Twitter essay called "Here's Why DALL-E 3, once deployed, will improve at a faster rate than Midjourney." His third point was called "Ecosystem Integration with ChatGPT is such a killer move." Jim writes, "It's almost trivial to add the existing puzzle pieces to DALL-E 3, such as the code interpreter and browser. Want to apply a filter? Just call the OpenCV API instead of running the model. Want a reference image? Call the search plugin to emulate Bard with Google Lens integration. What's more," he writes, "there is the existing user base. Midjourney has 16 million users. ChatGPT's got 100 million. Now, I think Midjourney and DALL-E 3 will be a particularly telling battle. Midjourney is not just some brand new wet behind the ears Y Combinator startup. They are a young startup, yes, but one that has quickly jumped into the pole position in their particular area and won a huge number of devotees, as well as people who have spent a lot of time learning how to work their system for maximum results. 16 million users might be less than 100 million users, but 16 million is nothing to sneeze at, and each of those 16 million users is there for exactly the purpose that Midjourney is there for. Now, of course, for Midjourney to have any hope, they will likely need not only to have feature parity when it comes to the quality of images generated, but actually be better in some distinct ways in order to overcome what DALL-E 3 is offering, especially in the integrated ChatGPT package. But the point of this, of course, is that the landscape of competition when it comes to AI has these really interesting dynamics that challenge assumptions from previous technology areas, and that I think are having a pretty big impact on how things develop. I think it's certainly too early to count out companies like Wondercraft and their many peers who are working on this type of dubbing. HeyGen is another one that has had a ton of viral content on Twitter doing language translation and dubbing for video. I hope that companies like this can stay competitive with the giants because I think that they have such a stronger incentive to innovate, to be efficient, to add new features, to expand the languages available. But I also think at the end of the day, I'm glad that these platforms are understanding how valuable these tools are going to be for creators and integrating them directly as well. AI product fall continues to be a fascinating, competitive, accelerating kind of time, and I appreciate you hanging out here as we go through it together. But that is going to do it for this episode of the AI Breakdown. Thanks as always for hanging out, and until next time, peace.